everyone. I have Dr. George Sparks with me. He's our resident archaeologist, and we have a wonderful topic for today. We want to talk about the women in the Bible. And George, where do you want to start?
First, I wanted to start on how archaeology could share light on the items that women would use during the ancient period, during what we'll call the biblical period. But we have a time of Abraham, because of patriarchal time. We have the time of the Exodus, such as Moses, the conquest. We also have the United Monarchy, which was a short period of time. And then we have the divided monarchy. That was hundreds of years. And then we go to time periods like the Persian period, the Hellenistic period. Now, we're not going to go into all that separately, but we're going to look at artifacts from these periods that women would have used. Okay.
So the point is that women did different things during different periods, depending on what was happening.
Not only did they, of course, do different things, but just as the style of cars has changed from the 1920s until now, the utensils that were used, they're similar, just as a car. Like I say, a car is similar, but it's also very different.
Oh, okay. So they were doing the same thing, but in different ways.
In different ways, but things that you could say the items changed, the pottery changed. And of course, in archaeology, I got a pottery chart right here, real quick to show you. There's a whole list. I don't know if we can see that very clearly.
Yeah, we can see it. Okay.
Okay.
It shows the different periods.
A pottery
by the different periods. Okay.
Right. Now, once we get an idea of what this pottery looks like during each one of these periods, we can identify where we're at in history according to what has been excavated.
Okay.
Makes sense. We're going to look at some of the rare artifacts. What is a rare artifact? I know that helps us. Something very unique that can only kind of like identify an individual. That's rare. And then something very, very common. We're going to look at something very common, like what would be very common in our culture? A light switch. Everybody's got a light switch, right? So what are the light switches in the ancient world? A lamp, but also throughout different periods of time, which archaeology gives like early bronze, late bronze. And I'll say that, but also I'll try to compare the archaeological period with a biblical event that tries to help us put it in its place. Okay.
Okay.
So on this time chart right here, you'll see the dating system. All right.
Okay.
But also on the I'll say on your right-hand side, my left-hand side, are the different types of oil lamps that we find in archaeological periods.
So why did they change? Why did oil lamps change?
They changed basically because the culture finds different ways of doing the same thing, but easier.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, we'll get into it. Let me show you some artifacts, if you will. All right.
Okay.
We're going to look at some artifacts that helps us to understand, the time period of the ancient world. Now, on my right-hand side, right over here, my left-hand side, you'll see what is called a fresco. You can barely see it back there. Can you see it? It's right over here. And it was painted as painted scenery, which is 1,600 years old. Now, from a distance, you probably can't tell very much what it is, but that's a fresco. And if we observe it very, very closely, you can see that it has earrings. It has a necklace. It has like a breastplate. And it also has little wings. Now, in the Bible, we say, like, if we're looking at the Bible, say, oh, an angel. No, that was Roman. It's an eros. And eros is a messenger. And it could be a messenger of good news or bad news. Eros is also a word for love, all right? A type of love in eros. So here we have frescoes. That'll tell us one way, all right, to identify what women did in the ancient world, how they dressed. Second, mosaic tile. The tile fragments, the little cubes that they made designs with on their floors.
Okay.
And a lot of those still remain, in which we can see lots of sceneries of the activities of what people did. One of the most famous is called the Mona Lisa of Galilee. And this mosaic is in the Sephora or Sephras, and it shows a banquet scene. And in the center of it, is a very beautiful woman. So they had dubbed that the Mona Lisa of Galilee, and it was a husband and wife team that made it, that found it.
And that was
All
on the
right?
floor, right?
It
Mosaic
was
on the floor?
floor. So what else do we find? We find amulets, like all kinds of little amulets.
What's
And
an amulet?
an amulet, something that you would wear,
Oh,
you
okay.
know. Now, let's say that if somebody's practiced Judaism and they're kosher, they're not going to have a graven image. But, we still find cultic remains in different settlements. Maybe you can see this one right here. This is a little figure of a midget. This is an Egyptian form of a bes. A bes. Let me show you something else. That'd be fun. Women like necklaces. Here's a necklace. All right.
Okay.
And on the very front of it right here, it looks like a tooth, but it's a little altar.
Oh,
A
interesting.
a four-horn altar. Where do we read about four-horn altars? All throughout the Old Testament, don't we?
Right.
Even the altar that's in, or we should say outside the Temple of Jerusalem, the four-horn altars. And also we have decorated scarab beetles. You can see this. On one side, it looks like a little beetle. On the reverse, it has hieroglyphs. And it could give a position of government. It could give a blessing. It could give a cursing. It could give a name of an individual.
Is that worn around the neck? Or?
Oh, this is worn as a ring, a seal ring.
Oh, it's a ring. Oh,
A
okay.
hole that goes right through the middle of it. And they put like
Okay.
a metal attachment in there. And they would
Okay.
they'd wear this ring. And if they want to seal something or put their imprint on, they just flip it over and stamp.
Is that called a signet ring?
It could be called a signet ring. We read about those throughout the Bibles, two of them.
Right.
Stamp sealing, you could say a message, an envelope. Now, in archaeology, here's a nice one. When we talk about rare artifacts, this is from Archaeological Review, Biblical Archaeological Review, back in, I believe, 2008. And if you could read the introduction, it's the scarab that many scholars believe it's very possible that this was owned by Jezebel, since we're talking about women.
It's the ring?
It's
Signet ring?
the scarab. This is blown up. It's the scarab right here, right?
Okay.
It's the scarab, but they're showing you the side that has the seal part of it.
Right.
Because here you have Paleo Hebrew. I believe it's in the yellow. That gives the designation of who this is. All right. So in Hebrew there are no vowels. So you're not gonna have no A-E-I-O-U's. So it's just going to give the consonants that read out Jezebel, right? So this is what we read. So there we have a listing. You got mosaics, you have frescoes, we have amulets, we have rings, we have necklaces, we have frescoes that all give us an understanding of what people did, what people wore, females in the ancient world, right? And also because frescoes and mosaics are usually in the house of the wealthy, we have a good idea what the wealthy women wore at that time period and how they decorated themselves.
So
right?
Can we learn about the common women?
We're going to read something about what's more common than a lamp. During the time period, you want to say the time period of King David, we say the United Monarchy, going to the time period of the Judges, even to the time period of Abraham. We have what we call the shell-shaped lamp. It looks like a shell.
What's it for?
Well, you would spin it like a bowl, like the potter would spin it, make a bowl first, and then he would pinch this one side right here, becomes the spout. Now, if you look very carefully, you can see how it's darkened because in the ancient world, this was used as a lamp.
So, it's a lamp. Okay.
It's a lamp.
And what would be in the bowl?
Olive oil.
Okay.
So we're not done yet. So
what would they use for a wick?
I'm going to show you in a minute.
Okay. Okay, I'm pushing in.
Now, what happened in the ancient world? The earlier lamps had a convex bottom. They were round. Okay. So they rocked back and forth, which was spill oil because they used olive oil for fuel. So after a period of centuries, I mean hundreds of years, the innovation, the new technology, it was to make the base flat. So here you can see a
Okay.
flat round base. Over a period of 100 years, somebody says, hey, we're losing olive oil. Well, why don't we just make the bottom of it flat? And somebody says, oh, okay. All right. So this is the time period, however, of what we call the Iron Age, the time period of both Judah and Israel. Now you asked me, how does this work? Now remember, this is fairly easy for us because on this time chart right here, I just go over and I compare which lamp I have in my hand. First one was right about here, so I check the date on it, right? It might say like 800 BC or so. Then I come up to this next lamp. It's Roman period. So I get my Roman period lamp. Now, remember, I told you the ancient lamps were made in the shape of a bull, and the spout was pinched where the wick would sit. All right. During the Roman period, they actually would press clay into molds. So a lot of lamps had designs, figures. But in the Jewish community, they had the commandment, no graven images. So their lamps were very plain, such as this one right here, very, very plain. Now, the opening right here is where they would put the olive oil. All right. So, you know, our good friend John Mancini, he gave me this bottle of olive oil. And I said, what's the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to light up this ancient lamp. And I bought some of these lamps from a friend of mine. And they were from a tomb, which was accidentally bumped into because they were widening a road in Israel outside of Jerusalem. And when they were widening the road, they bumped into a tomb, which opened it. And the artifacts were taken out. Now, remember that lamps are a common artifact. They're very common. So I purchased these lamps. I purchased 50 of them from that tomb. They date to the time period of Jesus, and they're called the Herodian, from the time period of Herod, where Jesus was persecuted under Herod. So this is a Herodian lamp. It's very plain because this was used by the Jewish community, and they had the commandment, no graven images. So if we're excavating at a specific site, and we see these plain lamps, it's usually a very good indication that the ancient inhabitants of that area were Jewish. Okay. And because they come from the time period of the Herods, it's called the Herodian lamp. They'd use olive oil for fuel, and they would put it into this large hole right here. And they'd take a piece of cloth and roll it up to make a wick, soak it in the olive oil, and stick it in the spout. Now, this came from a tomb outside of Jerusalem. And remember, I said that the lamps are very common. So it's not like a rare artifact. And a tomb would last for decades or maybe even centuries. So they're going to find lots and lots of lamps because the tomb's going to be dark. And I purchased like 50 lamps from this one particular tomb. It dates more than likely from the time period of Jesus and his disciples in that ministry. So they're around 2,000 years old. So what I'm going to tell you, Ann, is that this lamp right here is 2,000 years old, right? I got a wick in it. It's the first time it's going to be lit because I'm going to light it in 2,000 years on your program. You cross your fingers. There we go. There you go. This is what an ancient lamp would look like. Now you can imagine, because in the Old Testament, in Proverbs 31:18, it says her lamp does not go out at night. What's one of the duties of a wife, of a woman? To keep the lamp ready, lit.
Okay.
All right. Well, what's the second duty? If you want to keep your lamps lit, what do you have to also have with you? Olive oil.
Right.
Remember, that's the fuel,
Yeah.
right? And remember, there's a parable that Jesus taught everybody's disciples and the crowd around him. Matthew 25, verse 1, the kingdom of heaven is like 10 virgins. Of course, there were 5 wise and 5 foolish, but they're all waiting for the bridegroom. He delays. So the foolish women in the parable are the ones that did not have the fuel, the olive oil. So when they went to go get the oil, the bridegroom came and they ended up outside the house. Okay. And they knocked on the door and they wouldn't come in. He says, you were not diligent. Because what was Proverbs telling us earlier? It's about diligence. A woman's duty was to be diligent and to have fuel, olive oil, and to also to keep those lamps lit within the house. All right, according to the biblical text. So we have something very unique, a rare artifact, such as the notorious Jezebel. And we also have something very common that women would use, such as the lamp. And we also identified lamps from the patriarchal time period as being a shell-shaped lamp. They also used olive oil. They also used a wick. Why did it change throughout the years? It became easier to use this than the shell-shaped lamp. And they were making these from molds. The more common lamps of the Gentiles would have scenes on them now. They could have scenes of like a person playing or a ship, anything like that. So we have two, rare and common, rare and common. Now let's take a look at something else. Let's take a look at cosmetic perfume vessels. All right. And we're going to take a look at not just time period, but also different cultures. Different cultures. You know, women that are Egyptian are no different than the Canaanite women or the Israel women when it comes to cosmetics. Everybody wants to look good, you know, and even during a time of prosperity or even during a time period of, you could say, of troubles, cosmetics sell. We find cosmetic vessels in tombs. And so that's one identification. How we identify a tomb is by the artifacts that we find. And also we can date that tomb by the artifacts itself, by the different designs. Now, not only can we identify the time period, but we can identify the origin of a people. Did they travel? Were they indigenous or did they travel and settle? Okay. Now I'm going to give you a for instance on this one. All right. Now this one, this is called a pyxis. And this was used to store different types of perfumes. It's quite large. All right. This particular style right here is from the Algean, the Greek people. All right. The Philistines were originally Algean culture, Greek. All right. I'll just very simply. All right. Now you have different places for this Greek culture, such as the island of Crete, you know, but I'm just keeping it general. The Algean, the Greek people. All right. And they had their particular styles that they brought with them. Right. Now, this is a pyxis made by, you could say, the people of the Algean. Now, when these people settled, such as the Philistines, the word Philistines means sea people, all right? They brought that Greek culture with them, all right? But they made similar pottery. This is still a pyxis, but the clay is not as fine. It's not as levigated as in the homeland. The artwork on it, being bichrome, meaning two colors, is not as fine, not as delicate as that which came from their homeland. So we call this type of pottery that is from the Algean culture an imitation made locally. The local people imitating foreign pottery. And that tells us where these people came from. So we find this in tombs, all right? A type of pottery, a pyxis, that was used to store perfume in the tombs. And we can find this also basically in the wealthier people, all right? Whether it be the Philistines.
I'm curious, what did they use for perfume? Where did they get their perfume?
Oh, wow. You know, they could get that from flowers, from different types of sap from trees.
Oh, okay.
Let's see what else. Another item that they would use is, now that was Greek. Now this is Egyptian. And if you can see, it looks like a little baboon. And there's a little stick in it right here. And this is called this coal stick because they would take like coal, it's kind of dark charcoal, and they would crush up in the tube, and then they would use it for eyeliner, both men and women, right? So here you have something from the Algean area, the Greeks, and here you have another item that's Egyptian. It's made out of a substance called faience. It's a type of a glazing compound, all right? So we can identify a time period. The pyxis is late Bronze Age, 1550 to 1200 BC, And this is Iron Age, Egyptian. All right. Now, something else that we can identify in a tomb that will make it kind of fun is that once we get an idea of what items were used for, maybe we can use the archaeology to help us do what we call the exegesis, to interpret different scriptures. Now, there in each four gospel, it talks about Jesus being anointed. He was anointed by women. All right. Now, in the gospel of Matthew and Mark, it mentions Jesus being anointed by a woman, but it doesn't mention her name. However, in John's gospel, in verse 12, it mentions that Jesus goes to the house of Mary and Martha, who were the sisters of Lazarus. Remember, Lazarus passes away. Jesus goes because they bid him to come back, but he seems to be late. And they said, "Oh, you're late. He's already gone." And he says, "Well, why are you crying?" "What do you mean, why are we crying?" So anyway, part of what happens is later on they celebrate that their brother is Lazarus came back to life, right? And in that celebration, it says that Mary anoints Jesus with a perfume vial of 12 ounces of fluid, 12 ounces of perfume. Now, it doesn't mention what, it just says a box, but it doesn't tell us what it's made out of. But the other scriptures in Matthew and in Mark tells us that they were using an alabaster vessel. So here we have an alabaster vessel, quite large, and you can see that it's not going to hold no 12 ounces of fluid in this one, but probably around 6, maybe 8. And notice how the lid is very thin.
Is alabaster stone?
Alabaster is a soft stone, so it's easy to carve
Okay.
through, right? So you could use maybe like cork or maybe wax to seal it, right? But it would hold very, very costly perfume, probably spikenard. And it was so costly that that's this one instance where Martha anoints Jesus. What is it that Judas turns around and says, "Well, wait a minute, this could have been sold for so much amount of money." And Jesus turns around and says, "Leave her alone. She's preparing me for my burial."
Mm.
Gives us a little clue. Maybe, where did Mary and Martha get this perfume? You use perfume in a tomb because of the decomposing body, right?
Yeah.
Well, Lazarus is no longer there. Let's use some exegesis. Where would they get the perfume? Maybe from the tomb. What's a good indication? Maybe that's where it came from. What Jesus said, "Leave her alone. She's preparing me for my burial."
Hmm.
Maybe. But here we have an indication by using the scriptures, looking at, you could say, artifacts from that time era, how we can piece it together. Maybe even give it a more understanding of the relevancy of that scriptural text. So we could put an artifact to the scene and maybe piece the picture in our mind a little bit better. So it's using actual artifacts instead of Hollywood. And I think sometimes that's fun too. Okay. Perfume is good when you're feeling great, but what if you're not feeling so good? The makeup, the cosmetics, what if you're hurting? Well, in the ancient world, about the same time we have the Pyxis, they also were transporting opium in a certain type of vessel, which was called a bilbil. Now, archaeologists call this a bilbil, and the only explanation I got for that is that the way it might have sounded when they poured it out of the vessel, bill, 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 and they called it a bilbil. That was the dumbest thing I ever heard, but that's where the archaeologists get the name. This is Cypro-Phoenician. It dates from the late Bronze Age, 1550 to around 1200 BC, general date. So in a wealthy person's tomb, we find bilbils. Remember, this is Cypro-Phoenician, from the land of the Phoenicians, all right? Thutmose III, one of the supposed pharaohs of the Exodus, because it's made of terracotta, even though his tomb was robbed, they'll steal the silver, they'll steal the gold. The terracotta, they don't care. They found 3 of these bilbils, just like this. Why? because by the time the Pharaoh probably passed away, he's hurting really bad. So to get rid of the pain, right, they give him opium. Not just the Pharaoh, but who could ever afford it? Now, this bill would go along this trade route from Phoenician land through the bridge, which we'll call Canaan, right, the land of Israel, over to Egypt, because we found them in Egypt. That's a long haul. So we also find them in the land of Canaan. Now, remember what I said? When a culture sees something else, another vessel, they can make a copy of it. We call that an imitation made locally. This is a Canaanite imitation of a bill made locally. Now, they probably could have also stored opium in it. I don't know. And opium is a form of, you could say, to remove pain reliever. But at the same time, you're going to have some really good hallucinations going on. So in the cultic world, now I'm saying the cultic, such as, I'm going to just use the word witchcraft. In the New Testament, when the word witchcraft is used, it's referring to a Greek word meaning pharmakeia. Now, I'm not saying pharmacists are evil. My brother's a pharmacist. It's just the Greek word that was used in that particular scripture. All right. So it was not uncommon that if people wanted to, or they might have thought or felt that they were having visions, it could be the side effect of a type of medication they were using to remove pain. So in some of these cults, like the cult of Asclepius, right? Or Asclepius. And I think one of his daughters is named Hygiena. This is and he's holding a staff, and the staff is the same caduceus we use in the medical symbols of today. So here we go. It carries on, right? And in this cult, I would say cult, a religious practice, they also had the practice of prostitution. Here's another type of form. How do we bring women into the occultic world? Well, both ways. We can use like the witch of Endor. All right. And it said that she had a vision. And it says that Samuel shows up. Okay. And she, through, I guess, Samuel, there's a lot of, like different types of interpretation on how to, I don't want to get into how to interpret that, like the exegesis of a scripture. This is archaeology. So anyway, but the Bible does give us indications that where there are occultic practices, we have females in their role. Also, we have other substances being used as well, whether it be divination, such as in the case of the witch of Endor. All right. One of the list of what in the New Testament is referred to the lust of the flesh, lasciviousness, and was the evil eye. What the heck is the evil eye?
Unfortunately, we're out of time, and we're going to leave the evil eye for our next discussion. And what are we going to do in the next discussion?
Well, what we're going to go into in our next discussion, because now we got into like cultic practices, is we're going to look at the malevolent women of the Bible.
Okay. And there are quite a few of them, aren't there?
Well, yeah, there are, and
Yeah.
so this, and we're trying not to be judgmental.
Okay.
But anyway, it'll be fun because people like the soap opera in the Bible as well.
Yeah.
So,
George, thank you so much. It's really fun to see all these artifacts and what they teach us about ancient Israel.
and thank you.